Welcome back to Market on Close. I'm Caroline Woods in for Oliver Rennick. Let's get some technical analysis of this week's big earnings names and welcome in Gareth Soloway, Chief Market Strategist at Verified Investing. Gareth, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you as well.
Thank you. All right, before we get to some of these big names on tap this week, I want to get your technical take on the overall market. The S&P 500 going a whole lot of nowhere right now, not continuing Friday's sell-off, but also not necessarily charging ahead. What do you make of it?
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting to see that it does appear that the buyers are starting to meet resistance. And I do think that's more institutional resistance starting to recognize that economic data is starting to turn south here. So again, whether it's fears of tariffs or Michigan sentiment, lots of different factors starting to put pressure on the sell side. And I still think the individual investors buying the dip, but they're just getting met with more and more sellers. And we can see that even from December. I mean, basically we pierced the December highs on the S&P, but we've barely gotten above them, and now we're back below them. And that shows to me a weak attempt at a breakout that ultimately could head back lower and actually start to see a major sell-off. So I'd be very, very kind of conservative here in the near term until we see a defined breakout above those December highs.
Okay, and how steep of a sell-off are you talking about? Or serious? I can't remember what word you just said.
Yeah, so I think the key is going to be how fast it declines. So I'm looking at the market today, and I see names that were high flyers like Robinhood, 25% off of its highs of just 2 weeks ago. Other names like Palantir down again today, 30% off of its highs of just a couple weeks ago. And to me, those are the momentum names that were carrying this market ever since Nvidia kind of stopped carrying the market. And if those are losing the momentum or the kind of the excitement of investors, it to me says a bigger sell-off could be on the horizon. And I'm even watching crypto. Altcoins are really struggling and Bitcoin's beginning to come down. And these are all signals of risk off. So in terms of downside, we could be looking at one of those elusive 10% corrections in the not too distant future.
Okay. All right. Well, you mentioned Nvidia meeting some resistance today, but actually up about 10.5% this month heading into Wednesday's report. That being said, it is negative on the year to date right now. So does that mean expectations aren't sky high for Nvidia heading into this report, seeing as it's not a high flyer yet this year?
So yes, you're right. Margins are key here on Nvidia earnings, and then also forward guidance. Expectations are probably the lowest they have been in a while. But I will say that, based on what we're seeing on the charts, and I'm a technician, so I'm looking at probabilities and chart levels, there is still a slight negative bias. Not like historically where we've seen much greater levels, but you can see on that chart there that you would favor that first resistance, which we've pulled off of, and that 119 support. If we did break that upper level of support around 143, 157 would be your next major resistance. But again, the bias here based on all the factors I'm looking at give it a slight negative bias on earnings with a downside short-term target of 119.
So a negative bias could mean 119 following this report or heading into the report?
Following the report. So you would expect that to be the sell on the report, and then buyers would start to try to support the stock right around 119. If 119 gives way, then we have a lot bigger problems in the AI industry and in a lot of these stocks. But 119 would be where the stock would come down to. Buyers would be expected to come in for major support and keep the stock propped up around that level.
What is the real outlier in terms of the negative news that could send Nvidia shares lower? Do you think it's any maybe talk about DeepSeek and the impact there? Or I do think.
You're absolutely right on that, and I apologize. But so DeepSeek is going to be something that we're going to look for Jensen Huang to talk about and say, okay, is this going to reduce the spend of a lot of these players? And I think something that's floating under the radar is what Microsoft said today, which was that they were canceling leases on a lot of data centers. In other words, have a lot of these big players, potential customers of Nvidia, are they starting to think that they've overbought from Nvidia? Maybe they've doubled and tripled orders. They were expecting to build out so many data centers, and now they're saying, wait a minute, with DeepSeek, maybe we don't have to do all of this, and could that be something? Now, I will say this caveat is that Jensen Huang he's notorious for giving the rosiest pictures, so he will try to sugarcoat everything, but I think investors are smart enough to kind of delve into the details and the numbers, and we'll come away with something. But that's the real risk here, is that maybe customers have bought too much, and they're starting to pull back.
Okay. All right. So negative bias on Nvidia heading into the report, seeing some of that weakness play out today. Salesforce, meanwhile, is basically flat today, but even worse of a chart so far in 2025, down about 7 and change percent year to date, down 9% this month heading into the report. So what are you looking for from Salesforce? And then we can get into the chart.
Yeah, so from Salesforce, I think you're watching to see what their growth and guidance is. So the market's expecting a solid number, even a little bit of a beat on earnings. But really always remember, as investors out there listening, we have to remember that the markets are pricing in the whisper number. The whisper number, again, is for a small beat on earnings. So for the stock to rally higher, they not only have to beat the whisper number, but then actually give guidance that's showing strong continued growth. I think, again, if you look at this stock from 2023 when it was trading around $130, it is now, even at the pullback level, like you mentioned, it's still north of $300. So there is potential here for some downside support. And looking at the chart, we're looking at around $281 as major support. Again, currently trading at 310. So you're looking at about a 10% decline on earnings into major support. And then on the other side, if by chance they can come out gangbusters, there's not major resistance until you get up to about $381. So potentially risk reward wise, the reward would actually be on the long side, even though I do still think there's some risk that it does come in and underwhelms, as we've seen so many companies do.
Okay. Is there a bias like there is for Nvidia, though, just based on the chart?
Yeah, so in terms of this one, I've studied it left and right in every which way, and I have no good inkling on the directional move. So for me, anytime it's between like 50, 55%, 45%, what it tells me as a technical trader is to just sit on the sidelines and look to trade the result, right? So the best trades I get sometimes are just sitting on the sidelines, because we know that earnings can be a wild card. It can be like they can just say one thing in the conference call and it rips higher, a la Celsius last week, where initially the stock traded down and then they say, hey, we're going to buy out this company, we're going to grow again, and all of a sudden the stock goes up 50% almost on the day. So with Salesforce, it's no bias, but then look to trade these levels, buy at 281 and short at 381.
Okay. Meanwhile, Cava shares under a lot of pressure this month, down about 23%. I didn't even realize the move in Cava in February, down about 23% this month, still up over 100% over the past 1 year. What are your expectations for that report tomorrow afternoon?
Yeah, so I expect a good report from these guys. I think, again, the stock having come back in on the last earnings report, the stock gapped up to $172, and it's now trading basically at $100. So again, a big drop from the last earnings gap up and reversal down to this $100 even number. I love even numbers in technical trading because they're levels where people put stops. So the fact that it pierced 100 today, it means a lot of stops got taken out on buyers, which means, again, the bias to me flips back to the upside, and you can see the gap fill right there at 100 as well. And so I'd actually be looking, I'm a bullish into earnings on Cava. I think they're going to give a good report, and I think it's just sold off so much here that expectations, the bar has been lowered, where we can actually see a good report actually push the stock up solidly.
So Gareth, shares down 3.5% today. As I said, down 20+% this month. Would you be a buyer on today's weakness ahead of earnings?
I would be. It filled the gap today. Gap fills in technical trading are great levels. Again, a major gap here at 100, the even number. I'm a buyer into earnings going into the next couple days.
Okay. I also want to ask you about Bitcoin, which you mentioned is also coming off today, now trading below 94,000. It's interesting, or actually, no, back above 94,000, around 94,400, but still quite a bit off the earlier all-time highs. I had two guests on Trading 360 earlier today who both had $200,000 price targets for Bitcoin by year end. Does the chart imply that to you? What specific levels are you looking at on the chart for Bitcoin?
Yeah, so Bitcoin's been in this sideways consolidation phase, and usually sideways consolidation can be bullish, right? But the problem is it's waiting for that next breakout. So we have a 108,000 high. That's that top dotted line across your chart right there. That's short-term major resistance, and then we have 92,000 below that, where we're now hammering on currently. And for me, it's looking at the chart and just saying, hey, listen, we have a risk-off environment looking like it's starting to take hold. The S&P is barely off its all-time highs. Bitcoin's about 15% off of its all-time high, so we're seeing that underperformance. We've just come through a period where Donald Trump really drove and the excitement in crypto, but now you're in this void period where there's no new major catalysts. And to add to that, MicroStrategies has been buying billions and billions of dollars of Bitcoin, and it's not pushing price up. To me, that's a signal. That's a concern. And so for me, if you break 92,000 to the downside, there's actually an air pocket down to about 74 to 75,000. And I'd actually be worried about that first. I think we actually hit 74 to 75,000 first before we make that next move up. I'm a huge long-term bull on Bitcoin, but I do believe in charts and charts having precedence, and they will likely push us below 92 down to 74 to 75 before we get that next bull move to the upside.
Well, Scott Bauer of Prosper Trading Academy would certainly like to hear that, because I know that's the level he's been waiting to buy to get in. So you would wait to 74 to get maybe further in before investing any more money in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I would. And again, I think the key is here also is that there's a lot of Bitcoin investors who are just focused on Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's not in its own bubble. It's very much reactive to the NASDAQ and to the S&P. So if you told me S&P was going to be up 10% in the next couple months, okay, I think Bitcoin's at new all-time highs. I don't believe that's going to happen. I think the S&P and the NASDAQ are on the verge of a pullback, and I think that will bring Bitcoin down to that 74, 75,000 level, which will give a lot of us a nice entry on a pullback. And honestly, wishing Michael Saylor would see this, and because I think he could get a lot bigger bang for the buck with all the billions he's putting in if he waited just a little bit of time here.
I don't know. The biggest Bitcoin bull there. Gareth Soloway, appreciate the technical breakdown. Thank you so much.